Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab, and continuing with our series on answer writing for general studies papers of civil service main examination, we take up a question that you might come across in GS paper 3. However, even before we introduce the question, we have to confess that this is going to be, you could say, a speculative kind of question, in the sense that UPSC is less likely to repeat these kinds of questions. But we still have some time on our hands and we can actually afford to discuss these kind of questions, which you, as you would see, would actually make you think, and in doing so we would have an opportunity to discuss many important concepts. That is the prime objective for discussing these kinds of questions, even if they are less likely to appear in the actual paper. With this, we are introducing the question. That is, you would have noticed that the Nordic countries have consistently achieved highest positions among countries for living standards and happiness. What, according to you, are the factors to which such a remarkable feat can be attributed? What lessons India can learn from the experience of the Nordic nations? Uh, Again, starting with basic definition of Nordic countries, that is what this term denotes. Nordic countries are some countries in the north of Europe. For an example, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland. What is remarkable about these countries that they have consistently performed at the top of all the global rankings for most of the human development indicators, and you could say similar indicators like happiness, etc. So the question requires you to talk about what are the factors that you can think of that have led to this kind of stellar performance. And the another part of the question, that is the final part of the question, requires you to talk about what lessons you see here that India can emulate, that India can actually, if you could say, get inspired from the Nordic nations. We are introducing our answer with a piece of current affairs, that the in the latest inequality adjusted human development index published by UNDP, the ranking was topped by Iceland. Remarkably, the top 10 was dominated by Iceland and fellow Nordic countries like Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. As you can see, all of these are Nordic nations. That is, the 5 Nordic nations round up almost the half of the top 10 nations as per the performance on inequality adjusted human development indicators are concerned. Congruously, that is similarly, the Nordic nation Finland is ranked first on World Happiness Ranking 2024, with Denmark second, Iceland third, Sweden fourth, and Norway seventh, rounding out the top 10. So again, the story continues that the Nordic nations constitute almost half of the top 10. That is, each and every Nordic nation comes among the top 10 as far as happiness is concerned. These nations maintain such high levels of performance on most determinants of human well-being. So the thing is, it's not only if that it's their performance is limited to human development indicators and happiness, but in fact on most of the, you could say, criterion of human development and you could say human well-being, they perform at the highest levels. So naturally, what are the ingredients of their success? And actually their performance is often called the Nordic model. So what are the ingredients of success of the Nordic model? Taking up these, you could say, factors, determinants one by one. First, you can notice that they are well known for their political moderation. What it means that they have mostly followed centrist policies. That is, they are neither in the extreme left or nor in the extreme right. They are mostly, you could say, middle of the path. They have almost always taken the middle way. How we can say that? They have high degrees of individual liberty, individual freedom. At the same time, they have maintained public sector. You can understand very, very well that individual freedom, individual liberty is a, you could say, a defining characteristic of liberal capitalist democracies. At the same time, public sector dominance, that is the economy dominated by public sector, is considered a, you could say, identifying factor for the left-leaning socialist economies. You can see these countries have maintained the best of both the right wing as well as the left. That is, they have individual liberty, at the same time they have robust public sector as well. They are committed to welfare of the people. There is commitment to, they display commitment to welfare state. They have guaranteed access to healthcare. They have publicly funded education and social assistance like pension, disability assistance, unemployment benefits, etc. So they are committed to the welfare of the people through these steps. They have practiced progressive taxation. What it means, progressive taxation means that the rich pay higher taxes. They pay proportionately higher taxes actually. That is, as a proportion of the income, as you become richer, you pay more. This is the concept of progressive taxation. There is high level of social capital. Again, please look up this concept. It's a very, very important concept. The concept of social capital. It's very, very important. You do look up, you do, you could say, brief reading on this concept. It would be always helpful to know about the concept of social capital. And they have this high level of social capital not only in interpersonal relations and in fact in the institutional you could say dimension as well. How we can say that they have high interpersonal social capital? Because they have almost consistently maintained low level of crimes. At the same time, the institutions are quite robust. There is much less corruption in the Nordic nations compared to other nations of the world. Moreover, they have pro-worker labor laws, and as we would see later that even their workers are more enlightened compared to mostly militant unionism in India. The Nordic nations have more enlightened unions as well, and they have actually committed to labor laws as well, the welfare of the worker through the labor laws as well. Elaborating on these points, Nordic statesmen and their constituents, that is their voters, have displayed deep political sagacity, wisdom, in rejecting the extreme right and left ideologies. They swear by centrist policies. On the one hand, they affirm highest degrees of individual liberty. At the same time, they have robust public sector which employ up to 30% of the workforce. And you can understand very, very well that the public sector is well known for, as you can understand, job security. Government jobs are considered far more secure. Job security as well as perks, etc. That is benefits that are attached to your employment, etc. And due to this, you can understand almost a third of their population actually have secure jobs, and they are in high quality jobs as well. The private enterprises too are on the cutting edge of innovations, and it's not as if they have only public sector, robust public sector, but even their private enterprises are on the cutting edge of innovation. You would have almost certainly heard the name of renowned brands like Lego, which is well known for toy blocks, Tetra Pak, which is well known for, you could say, milk cartons mostly, and other, you could say, paper cartons. Novo Nordisk, which is considered one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and Rovio. Rovio is a video game studio which is well known for their Angry Bird games. They had published the Angry Birds games. So you can understand even their private sector is well developed and in fact quite innovative. The Nordic countries have adopted the model of welfare state. They have adopted the model of welfare state. They guarantee access to healthcare, provide free education going up to higher education level. That is, even the secondary and tertiary education are mostly free in those countries, and extend social assistance like pensions and disability pensions, as well as unemployment benefits, etc. Along with unemployment benefits. The Nordic countries are noteworthy for their progressive taxation system, where the rich pay proportionately higher taxes. As people become richer, they pay higher taxes compared to those on the lower income brackets. The tax rates are high to mobilize revenues for welfare commitments. But what is notable about the Nordic countries? As discussed in the preceding parts, the state in Nordic nations honors the social contract with the taxpayer by guaranteeing social assistance and quality public service. So again, this is a very, very important concept. The concept of social contract. It's a very, very important concept. You please look it up. So the concept of social contract is very, very important. It's actually even considered you could say a term in philosophy, or also that it's considered you could say a part of political philosophy, the concept of social contract. What it essentially means, social contract means that the citizen as taxpayer and the state as the tax collector have a, you could say, mutualist relation. That is, they have mostly a symbiotic relationship between the state and the citizen. The state gets taxes from the citizen. At the same time, it should actually assure of the citizen of high quality of public services. And as you would see that this social contract, keeping this social contract by the state, actually acts as encouragement for the taxpayer. Therefore, compliance rates are high. The compliance rate is high despite high tax rates, because the taxpayer actually expects something in return. While he is paying the taxes, he actually expects that he would get something in return. For an example, social assistance, or for that matter, high standards of public services. The Nordic nations have high degree of social capital. The crime rates are low, institutions are well regulated, and even corruption is mostly controlled. The corruption rate is too low. Their innovations in public administration are emulated by others. A case in point is the office of the Ombudsman, created in the 19th century Sweden. India's Lokpal Lokayukt is modeled after the Ombudsman, which was, as we have just seen, which was an innovation of Sweden in the 19th century, going back to 19th century. It was probably, you could say, it came into existence around the 1800s. So you can understand what Sweden invented at that time is even worthy emulation to this time as well. India's own Lokpal Lokayukt is modeled after the Ombudsman of Sweden. Many commentators attribute the low inequality and quality employment contracts in Nordic countries to enlightened collective bargaining. This is an important concept, that the union has to talk in fact, union has the right to enter collective bargaining, for an example, on wage settlement, employment contracts, etc. This is called collective bargaining, and this generally strengthens the hand of the individual worker. Collective bargaining is actually in favor of the individual worker. And labor laws that are clear yet sympathetic to workers. So you can understand very, very well, this point is often raised, that it's not as if India does not have pro labor labor laws, pro worker labor laws. The problem lies somewhere else, that most of the labor laws in India are not clear, and the enforcement is so complex that they end up harming both the, you could say, investor, both the capitalist as well as the worker. Just to give you one example, if due to some dispute the capital is stuck in a, you could say, sick unit, it would mean that the capitalist too would have to take quite some loss on the stuck capital. At the same time, the worker and his wages would be stuck in that dispute as well. So you can understand India's complex labor laws, which lack clarity, actually end up harming the interest of both the investor as well as the laborer, as the worker. Now, talking of what lessons India can pick from the experience of Nordic nations, the Nordic nations have demonstrated that there is no dichotomy. Again, this is a very, very important point, that there is no dichotomy between democracy and performance on living standards. Actually, you would have seen that most Indians complain that India cannot perform well on most of the, you could say, performance indicators, only because it's a democracy, it's a cantankerous, it's a noisy democracy. Unlike China, most of the time we give the example of China, but the Nordic countries actually show that you can maintain high levels of individual freedom, at the same time you can actually perform well on most of the human indicators. Taking into account the difference in size, we do agree that we have wide gulf in taking into account the size of their population. India is far more populous compared to the Nordic nations. A few ideas are still worth picking, that is, they are still worth emulating. You would probably appreciate that our founding fathers foresaw the need of social assistance for creation of a compassionate society. Again, try to understand it very, very well, that our preamble itself, you can recall that our preamble itself talks about the concept of fraternity. And you can understand very, very well that no brotherhood, no fraternity is possible if the society is not compassionate towards each other, especially towards those in, you could say, some hapless situation, those in who come from the deprived sections, or for that matter, you could say, who face some, you could say, misfortunes. So the point is, that is why social assistance, which actually creates compassionate society, is necessary to essentially lead to fraternity, brotherhood. Article 41, which was inserted into our constitution, Article 41 seeks to guide the policies and direction of universal pension, disability assistance and unemployment benefits. Actually, Article 41 is enumerated under DPSP, Directive Principles of State Policies, Part 4 of the Constitution, and it says that the state should actually try to direct its policy to secure social assistance in case of unwanted, you could say, needs, in the case of, you could say, misfortunes, for an example, old age, or for that matter, disability or job loss. So the thing is, it's high time, as we are arguing, it is high time pensions and social assistance were actualized as rights of people. What we are essentially saying, that it's actually the right time that we converted Article 41 into fundamental rights, that is, social assistance should be converted into fundamental rights. Moreover, it's not as if we do not have, you could say, template. We have the example of Ayushman Bharat, which has created a template for publicly funded healthcare. So the thing is, we do not lack examples worth, you could say, like emulating or even building on. So we do have examples like Ayushman Bharat, which can actually pave the way for publicly funded healthcare. You do understand, it's the world's largest publicly funded health insurance program, and we are essentially arguing for expanding its coverage, expanding the coverage of Ayushman Bharat, and you could say other programs for social assistance. For an example, enhancing the pension. It's not as if 500 600 pension is actually suits in the stature of a country like India. It's actually quite shameful that we are paying our senior citizens 500 or 600 rupees of old age pension. Institutions. Now coming to the institutional, you could say, factors. Institutions like Lokpal should be strengthened to create a high trust, low corruption climate for both common citizens and businesses. You do understand very, very well that a low corruption climate is something that businesses thrive in, and they are encouraged for investing more. That would create far better employment, you could say, you could say secure employment, and you could say again better paying employment for the workers as well. Moreover, we must focus on upgrading the experience with public services so that taxpayers enthusiastically contribute to revenues. We have already discussed this concept in one of our lectures on low tax to GDP ratio in India, and one of the reasons the tax to GDP ratio remains low in India because the taxpayer does not trust the government to actually pay the taxpayer back in one form or other, as the standard of low public service, the low standard of public services in India actually acts as a put off for the taxpayer. All these will go a long way realizing the goal of a welfare state in India as well. So this was on the performance of the Nordic nations, the top level performance of the Nordic nations on most of the indicators. What are the determinants, what are the factors behind such performances, and what lessons India can pick from the experience of the Nordic nations so that we can actually upgrade our performance. With this, we call it a day. We would reassemble for the next lecture in a few days. As usual, we wish you all the best. Thank you.